Hello, hello everyone. People are joining as we speak, which is great. We'll give people another minute or so before I kick off. But we've got a good number in the room already. Uh, the way we will do this is I will bring up a deck with all of our data and as well as some of the focus group quotes. I will run through that and then if there are any questions, you can let me know at the end. But otherwise, Angus, who lots of you will know, who is in the call, it will make the deck available afterwards for media colleagues as well, and we will upload somewhere on our website. So we're now at 2 minutes past, so I think that means I can kick off. So, view slideshow. Um, those of you who are veterans of our budget briefings will remember last few have had titles along the lines of Doom Loop and Doom Loop Deepens. We're slowly running out of inspiration given the overall mood and theme doesn't change. So this one is let's do the Doom Loop again. And if there is a sort of prevailing mood that marks the run up to this budget is one of real pessimism and worry, both in the headline stats that I will take you through, but also just from conversations with the public. I think both people's lived experience and also obviously budget briefing happens around every budget. I think this is the first one where I've had people complaining in focus groups about all of the level of budget briefing that there is, and they say, this sort of they say one thing, say the next. So I think the briefing process has as much shaped opinions as well. Um, and as I will go through, there is a fairly bleak context. If there is sort of what I'll try and pull out one sort of potential silver lining for the Chancellor, it's that people, recognize the scale of the challenge. I think the flip side of that is the time at which to convince the public that this government are the right people to deal with those challenges does appear to be running out, and there's an extent to which you can always say this about kind of fiscal events and major things, but there is a risk certainly, which I think this data presents, and again the conversations with the public that this could be a sort of last chance saloon moment for the government. And just to highlight the extent of that, this is our tracking of both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor's approval. And this is up to date as of our polling, which took place over the weekend and closed this morning. And when we got that data back, both Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer hit their lowest approval rating that we have recorded for them. You see, since they came into office, their approval ratings have been on initially quite a steep decline, then a gradual decline. Starmer himself got a little bit of a bump that you can see, largely due to Ukraine and international issues. But since then, the two have moved in lockstep. And as I say, the figures as of this morning are the two of them at a new personal low. And previous fiscal events have had a sort of similar pattern. In fact, one of the last lows that we'd had for Rachel Reeves was ahead of the spring statement. So it'll be interesting to see if there can be any shift in that. But one of the questions that we often ask each other as pollsters is, do you reach a sort of point of no return moment? I tend to be more optimistic than some of my colleagues in the industry, in the sense that I think electoral volatility means you can turn things around, but clearly the scale of the mountain that they have to climb is quite significant. And the economy is driving a lot of that. When we ask Britons, we find that more than half of Britons now say that they believe the UK is in a recession, compared to just 3 in 10 who don't think that the UK is in a recession. Now, of course, we're not in a technical recession, but it gives you an idea for how people are feeling about the state of the economy. You know, lots of people use recession to say the economy is doing very badly. And there are some groups that really stand out there, those who are struggling the most and those who voted for Reform UK are the most likely, who would vote for Reform UK are the most likely to say the UK is in a recession. And it is fair to say that if sort of doom and pessimism are sort of one of the markers of the public mood heading into this budget, the most important answer that people want out of it by far is, is this budget going to help with the cost of living? You know, that is the fundamental test that the public will place far more than any of the other things that we might discuss, such as, you know, around economic growth, for instance. And you know, it's been interesting that, you know, sometimes it's easy to think that the cost of living crisis kind of gone away or moved on, but it hasn't for most Britons. And if you look at this chart, you can see that around half the country says they're cutting down on luxuries, the little extras. That's something that we hear really fairly often actually in focus groups, is this sense of the little treats, the little things which make life fun or nice, people are cutting back on. Lots of people, I mean, similar numbers, 4 in 10 shopping around more, going out less, cutting down their own electricity and heating usage. And one of the things that I think is interesting is that, again, this is a trend we've noticed in focus groups, particularly over the past year, is people also link cost of living not just to their own circumstances, but also to businesses and hospitality struggling. So you get a lot more people saying, "Oh, like the cafes having to put up prices because its electricity bill has gone up." So it's sort of all encompassing. They're the sort of, you know, the largest effects which affect, you know, lots of people. You know, those are 4 in 10, but, you know, some people are really suffering at the really hard edge of that. So more than a fifth have gone into debt to deal with the cost of living crisis, 15% skipping meals, only 11%. So only 1 in 10 said that they haven't needed to take any actions in recent months. This isn't over the whole period. This is, you know, the last few months there. So the cost of living is overshadowing this budget. And this chart is really important. So since 2022, we have been asking people not just whether they're concerned about the cost of living, but whether they think that the cost of living crisis, or when they think the cost of living crisis will end. And again, just ahead of this budget, we now have 57% of Britons think that the cost of living crisis will never end. That's the highest that we have ever recorded for the numbers saying that it will never end, and that is a higher level of pessimism than ahead of the past two budgets. So when Jeremy Hunt revealed his budget in November 2023, just over a third thought it wouldn't ever end. When Rachel Reeves revealed her last budget, it was under half at 47%. So that's increased by 10 points. So lots of Britons worrying that the cost of living crisis is now the new normal. And alongside that, what has also risen is dissatisfaction with lots of elements of the economy. So the numbers who say that public services are in a very bad or somewhat bad state has risen from an already high 68%. That's 69% now. So is that right? Am I getting it right? 68 to the math. Yeah, that is right. And more people saying that it is in a very bad state. Similar pattern, in fact, more of a gap with the public finances. What's interesting is that those metrics seem to be coming down earlier this year. So if you look at public services, you had more people saying, I mean, still not far from a majority, but a bigger minority who were saying that they thought public services were in a better state. That has totally reversed there as well. Is there an exception to that. It looks like Labour's remaining voters, so not the people who voted for the party last year, we'll come on to them in a second, but those who would still vote for the Labour Party are increasingly sort of outliers on lots of these questions and are less likely to say they think the UK is currently in recession, or that the rate of inflation has risen, or that the economy is in a bad state. Reform voters, by far the most pessimistic, but they are joined on lots of these questions by Green voters as well, in who are also concerned. And it's interesting that those two non-mainstream parties, a lot of their support, obviously there are specific issues around immigration, particularly for reform, climate, environment, and the war in Gaza for the Greens, which are driving support, but the economy and that sense of economic pessimism clearly a driver. And just to, I guess, show those feelings about the economy in a slightly different way, if you look at this word cloud, when you ask people to describe the economy, the top words that come up are poor, stagnant, bad, and terrible. And again, if you look at some of those quotes from some of the focus groups that we've run over the past week, there's this sense that not just things are bad, but that they've got worse. As sort of Terence said, it's got horrifically worse. I think it's more than triple the black hole now. And also a common complaint, this sense that we aren't getting the change that was promised. That's not because people, sort of implicit in that is people do recognize that there is a challenge. They just are starting to think that Labour is more to blame for that challenge. So just 23% think that Labour are underplaying the challenges, but actually, if you look, 29% think they're being honest, 27% think that they are exaggerating the scale of the challenge. Although it is interesting that despite being more pessimistic overall, Reform and Conservative voters actually slightly more, well, quite a bit more likely than average to say that the problems have been exaggerated. Labour voters, those who voted for the Labour Party last year, are more likely to say the party has been honest. And again, I think this is, I showed you overall Rachel Reeves' net negative approval rating hitting a new low. If there is maybe in the public eyes a positive for her, it is that the public are more likely to say that she tends to make difficult decisions even when they're politically unpopular, rather than doing what is popular, even if it's not right for the country. Interestingly, that is different from Keir Starmer, and that's actually been a shift over the past year. So you can see the proportions were broadly the same at the time of the last budget. People tended to think both Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves made difficult decisions, even if they were politically unpopular. Now, the shift is towards thinking that Keir Starmer tends to try and do what is popular, even if it's not right for the country. Do people, so if we think about the income tax potential backlash, we asked people whether they thought the decision not to go ahead with an income tax rise was really because higher forecasts decreased the need for tax rises, or it was because of fear of political backlash. Most of the public, as per usual, quite cynical politicians, were more likely to say that they felt it was because of the backlash. And we'll come back to talk about the damage that could have been done to public opinion in public opinion terms had the manifesto breach income tax rise gone ahead. But what this sort of briefing, combined with the leadership chatter as well, has done in the public eyes, is reinforced a sense that this government is at least as chaotic, if not more chaotic, than the last one. So 40% of Britons now say that this government is more chaotic than the last Conservative one, 35% about the same, and 24%, just 24%, less chaotic. So that is the backdrop. Where do we get to in terms of public expectations? The vast majority of Britons expect their personal taxes to rise in this budget, that they will have to cut back on their spending, and that their quality of life will get worse. They are less optimistic, significantly less optimistic that the economy will grow. And I think there are obviously two ways to look at this from a public opinion perspective. One is, can the budget therefore only surprise on the upside, given expectations are too low? Or, and I think we found this with a few of the sort of previous fiscal events, has the sort of backdrop and mood lighting made the mood so low that actually, even if it is more positive than expected, the public are programmed almost by what they've heard to react negatively. And obviously, we won't know that until we hear the details of the budget. But sort of a lot of pessimism. And I think this chart is really striking because this shows you by income whether people are pessimistic or optimistic about the forthcoming budget. Every income bracket is more pessimistic than optimistic until you start earning over £100,000 when you narrowly become more optimistic. There, pensioners and reform voters are feeling the most pessimistic. Retired Britons feeling particularly pessimistic, perhaps because of the experience of things like the winter fuel allowance, and also Reform UK voters as well. And whilst the public might be willing to give Rachel Reeves credit for taking tough decisions, that does not translate into having confidence in Rachel Reeves to manage the economy. And again, if you look at these headline figures, they are in of themselves pretty grim. So around 76% of Britons say not much or no confidence. I think the figure that probably would worry number 11 most are the Labour 2024 voters, where almost half say that they don't have confidence in the Chancellor to handle the economy. And I can't remember what that quote about hindsight is, but when we then ask people in a head-to-head to pick between both Sunak as a former Chancellor and Jeremy Hunt, people now tend to say that the two former chancellors would have done a better job. They are similar numbers to what you get when you ask about who would make a better prime minister, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Now, look, again, often people answer these questions as referendum on the incumbent rather than a general comparison. Again, though, I think probably the figure which is will be most concerning to Downing Street is the 27% of Labour 2024 voters who say Sunak would make a better prime minister. And you see that also in this slightly a different question, which asks which of the two party leaders in last year's general election was closer to telling the truth. Note the question was not phrased as who was telling the truth, because then we'd have had to put in a neither option. And I'm fairly sure that would have come out on top. But when you ask who was closer to doing it, people more likely to say that Sunak was closer to it. But that said, I think that whilst people think Sunak was telling the truth, very few think that their taxes would actually be lower if the Conservatives had won the election. The plurality say they would be the same, with equal numbers saying they would be lower or higher had they won. Britons are slightly more likely to say that the economy would have been in a better state had the Conservatives won. Where does that leave us then on, so far we know that the public are fairly gloomy. They want action on the cost of living. They expect their taxes to rise. Where do they want those taxes to come from? Well, I talked about the income tax U-turn or not turn or decision not to proceed, whatever you call an announcement that was never actually made. The terminology is for. One of the things we did was we asked the public to engage in a hypothetical exercise where we asked them to rank a series of scandals on how damaging they thought they were, and then we also asked them how damaging breaking that manifesto tax pledge would be. And what you see there is, firstly, one of the things which I think is quite interesting, but is very definitely something that we have noticed from focus groups, is that if you look at the COVID scandals, that PPE procurement scandal is now seen as more damaging than Partygate. And that's very definitely, again, from conversations with the public, that does seem to be more of the focus of public anger now than Partygate itself, I say as an aside. Interestingly, though, if you look at winter fuel and that initial decisions to means test it, that's put on a par with the PPE scandal, actually put higher than Partygate or the mini budget or freebies or farmers' inheritance tax. But when you ask about breaking the manifesto tax pledge, that would have come out even higher than all of those potential, well, all of those real scandals or elements of where the government found itself on the wrong side of the public there. Now, look, in these types of questions, you do get a bit of recency bias. You see the Lib Dems tuition-free promises, for instance, much lower. But the fact that if you look, let's say, just at winter fuel, which is, the most recent of the other ones, or farmers' inheritance tax, the fact that breaking the manifesto pledge is seen as higher than those two, and we know how much political pain the government has taken, suggests that they made the right decision in public opinion terms, at least, not to proceed. And that doesn't necessarily, though, mean that they are off the hook, because we also asked whether freezing tax bans would count as a breach of the promise not to put up income tax, whether it would or wouldn't. And what we find is that 47% of the public think it would breach it, 28% think that it wouldn't. You get a chunk in the middle who say don't know. So almost half the public saying it counts as a breach. Again, the number to look at there is amongst Labour 2024 voters, where they are basically split right down the middle on whether it's a breach or not. My sort of, from having spoken to lots of people after budgets, even though you get that, significant chunk saying it's a breach, it is still likely to be far less damaging because at least there is a sort of rationale that the manifesto said rate of, and that people tend not to notice this stuff in the same way that they notice a rise in the headline rate. But it does not mean it will be politically painless for the government. And I think one of the, this is perhaps the biggest shift. Often attitudes to tax and spend are somewhat thermostatic. So, attitudes to, if you remember in the run up to the last election, there was probably more of an appetite for putting up taxes, even on working people, to improve the public realm. What we find now is Britons are significantly more likely to say they would rather see a cut in spending on public services rather than taxes raised on working people, including Labour and Liberal Democrat 2024 voters. And again, in conversations with people, it is, people often say, oh, the public are cakists, they want better services, they want low tax. As I think I've said before, the truth is, most of the public think there's a third option, which is waste. And that's because politicians of all parties spend so long saying that they can deal with things through waste that, the public sort of take them at their word on it. But I think, this is interesting in that this is very definitely more of a shift than you would have seen previously. And what we've got here, you can see is we asked people about a series of groups and whether they should, whether you would support these groups paying higher taxes. And what you can see is the chart in red shows you the change in support for taxing those groups more, and support for taxing employed people, businesses, employers, NI, self-employed people, pensioners has all gone down. In the case of pensioners, already from a very low point since the summer. The only group where it has gone higher is taxing those, increasing taxes on those with incomes over £125,000. And again, the part, this goes to that discussion that I was having about waste. One of the challenges for the Chancellor is that lots of Britons think that the Chancellor has not just other options, but other good options that she could do that don't involve putting up taxes. So nearly 6 in 10 Britons think the Chancellor has other good options that don't involve putting up taxes, as opposed to 25% who think that the Chancellor has no choice. Again, That includes a majority of Labour voters at the last election who think the Chancellor has other good options. And that's a slightly different way, whether taxes need to go up for everyone or targeted taxes on certain businesses and the wealthiest will be sufficient. Most people, a majority, think that targeted taxes will be sufficient, although Tory and Reform voters more likely to say that they're not sure the government actually has to put up taxes at all. And there is a general sense that, particularly amongst those who voted for parties of the left, that the wealthy in Britain's don't, the wealthiest Britons don't pay enough tax at the moment as well. But what about when that is pitched in a way, against the arguments that we're hearing that this is going to lead to, capital flight or, wealthy Britons leaving the country? Well, it's fair to say there's a big chunk of Britons who say, good luck and close the door on your way out. 44% of Britons say the government shouldn't worry about the possibility of wealthy Britons leaving the country when making decisions. 41% say they should. And this is one of those where you get some of the starkest splits between voters of parties for the left and for the right, particularly the conservative voters are concerned about that. What other individual measures are popular? Increasing taxes on online sports betting is very popular. I mean, sin taxes in general are very popular across all our work. I'll come into more detail on the mansion tax in a second, but when that was mooted to be at 1.5 million, there was support there. The milkshake tax, popular, and ditto the, border on the sugar levy, paying per mile, a bit more split for EVs, but actually still more support there than not. And the tourist tax splits people down the middle. Actually, there, as you can see, the freezing of the income tax bands or the neat income tax NI swap are more unpopular than not. Um, so where do we get to when we ask about a mansion tax? A mansion tax is very popular. It is more popular outside London than inside London, as you might imagine, although still a majority of Londoners support the idea of a mansion tax. And this shows where the public think that it should be levied, which is that the basically you hit a majority once you get to the 2 million mark. So it looks around that level would be where Britons would want to see that. So if that has been the change, the rebanding, or however it's going to be pitched, that looks like it will line with public opinion. But I think there is the smorgasbord approach, as it's been dubbed. I think whilst those individual tax measures are, tend to be more popular than not, there is a risk that taking them in aggregate means that you have, if we were to look at, actually, one of the things we should look at, we should look at people who object to at least one of the mooted risers. You get a much bigger number. And so there is a danger that looking just at those headline figures on individual taxes, if you look at people who are likely to be outraged by just one or annoyed with just one, that in of itself may be a problem because we know people are much more, loss aversion means people are much more likely to be frustrated by things that they oppose than those that they support. And this gives you sort of one example, which is when we looked at the EV taxation per mile tax, there was a bit of a split there. So I do think that is a challenge. The methodology included at the end there, that some of it actually, the first slide I showed you on the approval ratings and some of the other stuff is actually a bit more recent. So we'll update that when we send it out. But I will stop there. And as I say, we'll make this deck available and very happy to answer any questions that anyone might have. I think you just type them in the Q&A and I will come to them. I'll give it, and it takes a couple of minutes to type, so I'll give you time to do that. I'm going to have my Diet Coke in the meantime. Any questions? Okay. Yes. A question from Amy McCarthy. Thanks. This is there any reason Green voters were not included? So Green voters were included in the ones where we look at current voting intention because there is a big enough voting sample. So on those optimism, pessimism measures, they weren't included in the ones where we break down by. I mean, they are included in the polling, and you can see it on the tables, but we just didn't put them in the graphs for the 2024 vote one, just because of sample size and the reliability there. Um, Anonymous attendee says, "Thanks, Luke. Super helpful. Any sense of how people feel about welfare changes?" Um, so again, I mean, we've done quite a bit of work looking at attitudes to welfare changes, and there is certainly when we ask people, is it too easy to claim benefits? Should there be greater conditionality on benefits? There is support for that. And the principle of welfare reform is one that people backed. The government sort of lost the room on the welfare reforms last year because it was seen as targeting people who were genuinely sort of vulnerable and in need as well. On the specifics of the two-child cap, my personal view on this, I mean, others might take a different view, but from doing quite a bit of polling and focus group work around it. I think it is one of those questions where the old Tony Blair 3 second, 3 minutes, 30-minute conversation makes a difference. So if you ask people at a headline level, they tend to oppose removing the cap. So it's around, I think it's a majority who oppose removing the cap. Although I'll dig those exact figures out and we'll put them in the deck as well when we send it round. But if you then make an argument that this will help tackle child poverty and it's not children's fault that they're born into families of more than two children, actually things flip and they flip much more easily than they do on lots of other topic areas. So my view looking at that and all of the conversations we've had is it's probably a values argument that Labour are never going to win over fiscal conservatives on it, but it is probably one where if they make a strong values-based argument, which you might say has been missing from some of their comms when it comes to reaching the public today, that they can win people over. It's actually probably one of those areas which could be a sort of win-win for both Labour and the Conservatives perversely, because it frames a more clear economic left-right debate. And I think it's slightly harder for Reform UK in those circumstances, actually, because their base is much more split on questions like this. Some anonymous attendee says, can you expand why this is last chance saloon for the Chancellor? I think because if you just look across that data, I think she is losing the room, right? And people do not understand why why there hasn't been positive change, why the decisions that have been taken, whether it's disability, farmers, winter fuel, etc., have been taken in the way that they have, and they are starting to blame her and Keir Starmer, as you can see from the polling, personally. And I think a failure in this budget to correct the narrative will just mean that those very negative impressions do become quite deeply, or even more deeply entrenched. Like it is difficult, you know it is difficult to keep going if your approval ratings remain at -50, sort of, for indefinite periods of time. So I think it is that you've got to find a way to get the public, if not fully on side, at least sort of willing to give her a hearing again. Oh gosh. Good question from Alex. Do you have any quality follow-ups on why PPE has climbed in importance and in voters' mind? Yeah, I think a couple of things there. Obviously, I think I think part of it is just the nature of how the scandals sort of unfolded. So obviously Partygate was more big bang, whereas PP has been more drip drip, and people say, "Oh, we keep hearing more and more about what actually happened." I think again from focus group conversations, Michelle Mone has cut through a lot, and people bring her up personally there, and I think there is a little bit more of a sort of sense that like PP scandal is like actually people trying to make, be on the make from the pandemic directly from conversation with people. We were all struggling and these people were thinking about how to make money. Whereas there's been a bit more of a reappraisement of Partygate, which is not that people are any less angry, but that it's a different category of thing to PPE, if that makes sense. Um, Anonymous attendee, I think this is a great question because I think which is which party stands to benefit if the budget lands badly? What do the public think of alternative budgets? They don't really think of alternative budgets in the same way, but I think there is a bit of a I'm not very good at sporting analogies, but the one about the ball coming free and who's there to catch it from the sky. I won't do the sporting analogy actually. I will. It is basically look. It tends to be your principal opponent who does better. So I suspect you will see Reform doing well, but also you may get more disillusioned progressives going to the Greens. The only way in which that could be slightly different is if if that those numbers on public spending, preferring to cut public spending rather than um, raising taxes do lead to an appetite for greater fiscal conservatism. That could be an opportunity for the Conservatives, and I do think their pitch at conference as the one sort of fiscally conservative party. Whilst it's difficult to bring an sort of build an election-winning coalition off the back of that, fiscal conservatism, it probably is enough to help stabilize them and to, help them at least get a hearing from the public. I tend to think the more the debate is on economics as opposed to migration in particular, the better it is for the Conservatives, or indeed a straight sort of Conservative Labour battle. And the next question is sort of similar to that. What do you think this means for Kemi Badenoch and the Conservatives? It feels like this, the public could be open to the Conservatives' economic message. Yes, although I still don't think we're talking about you getting back to 40% on talking about fiscal conservatism. I do think it probably, as I say, does help to stabilize you at 25%. The difficulty, of course, is that, whilst people's anger at the moment is directed to Labour and people don't like Labour doing the blame game, so people don't tend to like it when Labour says, oh, it's because of the Tory inheritance, the public still feel that inheritance is there. The public don't feel that the Conservatives' track record was good enough. Sorry, that's understatement of the year. They think things like the mini budget obviously were quite disastrous. So it's whether they can pitch that they have rebuilt credibility in time. Question from Anil. Where do people think substantial cuts in public spending could be realised? So I mentioned waste, sort of mythical waste, or real waste, depending on how you look at it, but that comes up repeatedly. When we ask about which departments could most could most take cuts, almost absorb cuts. Again, it tends to be the smaller departments. So spending on culture, media, and sport, spending on international development, the Home Office, although excluding policing as well, and some of the spending around transition and net zero as well. Did labour shortages and immigration come up in discussions? Not in these discussions. I don't think people are making a link between labour shortages and the economy, particularly at the moment. When people do talk about immigration in the context of workforce, it tends to be around NHS and care workforces and wanting to make sure that any measures to tighten upon immigration don't leave us with NHS or care worker shortages. We have in the past, not that long ago, we asked people if they would be prepared to accept lower immigration if it led to lower economic growth. And actually, more people were likely to say that they would accept lower economic growth for lower immigration. But that is in part because lots of voters now don't think economic growth benefits people like them. So particularly Reform and Green voters, if you ask if the economy grows, will you benefit? They are more likely to say we don't think that we will. When we pitch the same question about would you be prepared to accept restrictions on immigration if it led to shortages in care or NHS roles, people were much more divided. And gosh, I have lots of questions, which are great. So let me. Are the public responsive to the argument that Brexit has contributed to the productivity downgrade? So we have looked at this. So most Britons, 55%, say it would be unfair to blame economic issues on Brexit. A third say it is fair to do so. And you get similar numbers whether you could blame tax rises on Brexit. I think what basically happens with that argument is I don't think that is ever an argument which is intended to be made to, reform swing voters. It is an argument that sort of better rallies your progressive base. So I think the reason for making that argument is that people, there are lots of progressives who, as we know from many reasons, are disillusioned with the government. There is one group, particularly some of those who've gone to the Liberal Democrats, for whom a failure to do more to reverse Brexit is one of the drivers. And this argument helps to sort of rally those voters more, but not sort of voters overall. And part of the reason it doesn't work as a Farage attack or a direct Farage attack as opposed to rallying your base is that when you ask people, only 6% of people do think that Brexit has worked well, but nearly half think it could have worked well, but it was the fact that politicians messed it up. And the argument that Farage is able to make to his supporters, not to people who voted for Remain, but to his supporters is, had I been in charge, I would have done it better. Is there any sense what might help break the doom loop and improve the mood amongst respondents? Asks Will. Short of things, I genuinely think the cost of living easing is part of it. But I also think there's another thing that we've noticed from focus group conversations, which is I know lots of people have been quite down on some of the arguments around, some of the proposed policies around freezing prescription charges or freezing train fares. I actually think there is something about the government being shown to make effort on these things. It's what I'm sort of calling the sort of every little helps approach to the cost of living, which might get, and I might be wrong on this, but just from talking to people, the sense the government is at least trying and is doing a lot of things and is easing things at the edges, I think might help. That's the sort of short-term fix until you get to what has to be the long-term fix, which is people seeing visible economic improvements and also in the economy services in general. There's a question about mansplaining, which I'm just going to look up the data on Reeves's approval between men and women, and obviously I'll come to that in a minute. Charlie, who is a stalwart of our webinars, asks, is there generally less resistance to paper mail if it comes in first for EVs? As presumably people change to them, it becomes accepted compared to general poll. Yes, it does look like that in a sense that you can obviously make the argument that they're exempt from her fuel duty as well. So there is a minority who think that they got an EV and now this is coming in, as you saw from some of the quotes, and it was sort of false pretenses that they wouldn't have to pay the tax, but that is a minority. Right, I've now got the gender data. So, anonymous attendee says Rachel Reeves says she's fed up of people mansplaining how to be chancellor. Are there any differences between men and women on how Reeves is perceived? So, when you ask if she is doing a good job or a bad job, women are less likely to say that Reeves is doing a good job than men, actually. So, I mean, it's quite marginal difference, but her net good job, bad job is -49 amongst men and -54 amongst women there as well. So it looks like it's similar numbers who say bad job, but just fewer women say she's doing a good job overall, and there are more don't knows. Someone else says, thanks so much, Luke. Also, not one for sporting analogies. Great. I missed to start. I was wondering if you have any insights on support for government measures to protect British startups, SMEs, and through like EMI, etc. I don't think we do, but we probably will look at this when we do. We will do another series of polling immediately after the budget there. Amy asks, do you think anything the Chancellor PM could do to turn it around? I guess this links to what I said previously. I think there is things about being shown to make effort. Another one might be the VAT on energy bills as well, and sort of showing people the discount they're getting. I do think small measures. I think part of the problem is at the moment the public can now start to think the government has stopped trying to help ordinary working people, and so tangible measures which make a difference in people's everyday, I think, are part of that. And someone else says, it's not depressing seeing how uninformed most people are about political economy, e.g. you think cutting waste is the answer to public finances, to which I say the public have consistently been told that by politicians of all parties across the spectrum, that efficiency savings are the answer. So I can entirely understand. I think it's a reasonable response from the public to think that. And if you want to change that, you have to start having a more direct and honest conversation with the public. That was a great series of questions. As I say, we'll make this deck available afterwards. I think, in fact, Louis, my colleague, who was also the one providing rapid information to the questions I didn't immediately have answers to at my fingertips, has put a link in the chat. And thank you so much for joining. We have another one of these where we will run through post-budget data, which I think is this time next week. So if let me just double check that, so I'm not telling you the wrong time. Oh, it's not this time next. Oh, it is this. No, it's at 1. It's an hour earlier for some unknown reason. We've decided to go an hour earlier for that one. But please do come and join that if you like this. Do feel free to drop me an email with any questions, feedback, anything else you'd like us to look at. And I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. Thank you.